Good afternoon. It is an honor to have FBI Director Christopher Wray with us at the IACP Annual Conference. The FBI has been a longstanding partner to the IACP, and it has provided great support to federal, state, local, and international law enforcement. Myself and other leaders of the IACP have had the opportunity to meet with the Director, Wray, and discuss the many unique challenges and the complexity agencies face daily to safeguard our communities. Encryption, going dark, combating terrorism, information sharing, cybersecurity, human trafficking, police use of force, data collection, the migration from UCR to NIBINs, and the list goes on. The IACP looks forward to our continued partnership with the FBI and to tackling these challenges so that we can complete our shared mission of protecting the public. Director Wray, on behalf of the IACP, thank you for your partnership and thank you for your leadership. Please join me in welcoming Director Wray. See you again, sir.
Thanks. You bet. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks. Thanks, Don. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm grateful to the IACP for the chance to have this conversation. I thought I'd take time to go through a few of the challenges that we all face together and also talk about the importance of building ever stronger partnerships and friendships. First, though, since this is our first chance to kind of sit and talk together, I wanted to say a word or two about my own frame of reference and some of my initial observations since coming back into public service. You know, I've only been back for a couple months now, but I'm working hard to meet as many people as possible and to try to get up to speed on all the great work that's underway. So I've been meeting with every division, every program, and traveling around the country to our different field offices. I think I've been to 11 different field offices in my first 11 weeks, where I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of your dedicated officers as well. And I've been lucky to work with the men and women of the FBI for a huge chunk of my professional career. First, as a line federal prosecutor out in the field, I got to work with agents on everything from bank robberies to public corruption, from kidnapping to financial fraud. And then after that, at DOJ's leadership, more at the headquarters level, I had the opportunity to see firsthand the unbelievable way that agents, analysts, and others tackled the national security threats, both on the day of 9/11 itself and in the first several years afterwards. And I can tell you, I just could not be more fired up to be back and part of the Bureau's next chapter. It took me all of maybe 5 seconds walking back in the door to remember how much I missed this mission and the opportunity to work with folks like you. You know, that mission is very simple to say, but much more profound to execute, to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And that mission has not changed, and it's not going to change, not as long as I have anything to say about it. Abiding by the rule of law and by our core values, following the facts independently, wherever they may lead, and pursuing justice. Those are the FBI's anchors, and I'm determined to make sure that we adhere to them no matter the test. So that's what you can expect from me. You know, over the last few weeks, people have been asking me substantively, what are my goals, my priorities for the Bureau? And to calibrate expectations appropriately, I want to tell you I'm still in learning mode. I take seriously my responsibility to kind of get up to speed on the facts and what's all the things that are underway and kind of be able to assess the state of play. So I'm still in the process of determining my own long-term priorities and where I can best devote my energy for the cause of law enforcement and national security. But I do know that my immediate priority has been to sort of bring a sense of calm and stability to the Bureau. In a society sometimes fixated to a fault on results, I'm somebody who's a big believer in the importance of the integrity of process. And that's part of how I'm hoping to sort of steady the ship. by staying laser focused on the mission and on the work itself. Day in, day out, left foot, right foot, grinding away, following the rules, following the law, following the guidelines, trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing but in the right way, treating everybody with respect. Those are not glamorous concepts. As my wife and kids will tell you, I'm anything but glamorous. But that is the approach that I intend to pursue: steady, rock solid, dependable, and I think that's the Bureau at its best. One of the things that's really struck me since being back, and it struck me almost within the first day or two, and has struck me consistently over my first 11 weeks, is the strength of the partnerships that have developed over the last decade, especially compared to the way partnerships were before 9/11 and the first immediate aftermath. My own appreciation for the importance of partnerships is heavily shaped by my last government tenure through things like the JTTFs on counterterrorism, Project Safe Neighborhoods, on gun crime, OCDEF, and drug enforcement, all things that I spent a lot of my time on when I was in government before. So I came into this job kind of already hardwired to be focused on the importance of partnerships, and I was intrigued, to put it mildly, to kind of see where the Bureau was in 2017 on those kinds of things. And I can tell you I'm very pleased by what I've found. Partnerships are much more part of the FBI's DNA than I imagined I would find. And I hope you see that as well in your work with us. I know that our SACs are working daily with you, and they're giving me a lot of feedback on how things are going, what's working, where we can improve. And I have to tell you that one of the things that struck me in my conversations that's different is that right from the beginning, I'm hearing about partnerships in just about every conversation. You know, the Bureau that I remember from before was proud, was passionate, was perfectionist, was persistent, and all those things remain true in spades. What's changed, though, and changed notably in my view, is what it is that they're most proud, most passionate, most perfectionist, most persistent about, and that's partnerships. And I have to tell you, I wasn't expecting to find that, but I'm very, very happy that I did. And it's not just at the leadership levels. In going out to the field offices and getting case briefings, one of the things that struck me is that those briefings at the line level have regularly included state, local, and folks from other federal agencies as part of task force briefings as well. In fact, when I visited the Newark field office, just as an example, recently, I think over half of the briefings, which were done in joint groups, were actually led by the state or local task force member. And that, to me, is a sea change. I'm quite confident I would not have seen that in the late 90s or early 2000s. And I think it's a reflection of just how much we value you. In briefing after briefing, in every field office, no matter whether it was a gang case, a counterterrorism case, a crimes against children case, it didn't matter. The involvement of our state and local partners was in some way front and center. A lead, a piece of evidence, a target, you were involved. And that's the way I think we need to be working today, tomorrow, and the days after that. Sharing information, sharing best practices, working together on joint investigations, on task forces, big and small, tied tightly together. I also want to thank you for sending your leaders to the National Academy. As you know, building partnerships is, of course, what the National Academy does best. It's a bridge that connects state, local, and international law enforcement, and every National Academy yellow brick builds on that same foundation of friendship and collaboration. There's a lot of stories that illustrate that, but one that really jumped out at me involves the Pulse nightclub attack in Orlando last year. You know, the night of that attack, our ASAC in Tampa, our Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Ron Hopper, got a message about the shooting, and it was like 2:30 a.m., and he got it from a task force agent. So he asked the agent to get more information, and then he called the Tampa Communications and Tactical Ops Center, And he called the task force agent's boss on the JTTF. But at that point, no one really had any news. So he just decided to pick up the phone and call the chief. Now remember, we're talking about 2:30 a.m. Sunday morning. But he picked up the phone, and he felt comfortable picking up the phone because he had already developed that kind of relationship with the chief. And that made it possible for Asai Copper, very shortly after that, to be able to walk into the command post and walk right in. He didn't have to introduce himself to anybody there because he already knew the people, and he's able to walk right in and say, John, Jerry, Danny, hey, what do you guys need from us? What do you need from me? What can we do to help? That should be the goal of all of our interactions. We want our partnerships to be so strong that we won't hesitate to pick up the phone when we need to call each other at 2:30 in the morning. So I hope that you feel that that's the way it is where you are already, and if it's not, we want to hear about it. Because the reality is that when the going gets tough, we're going to need each other more than ever. Now, as if our challenges weren't tough enough, I'm acutely aware that many of you have also been impacted in different ways by natural disasters recently, between one hurricane after another and then the wildfires. But in the midst of all of that, you were still there for your communities in their darkest hours, banding together to help in whatever way you can. In Houston, our FBI SWAT agents partnered with the Houston PD to conduct more than 200 search and rescues. One example, with a 5-ton truck, they were able to rescue about 100 families from the low-lying Greenspoint neighborhood. And those officers, those Houston PD officers and those agents did that together, and they did it without a second thought, leaving their own flooded homes and their families behind to do that, to help their neighbors. In Puerto Rico, we are not only offering law enforcement assistance with our local partners, but we're delivering humanitarian aid, but again, together. And I know there are dozens and dozens of similar stories, because that's what we need to do, and that's what we do. We're there for each other and for the communities that we serve. And the only reason we're able to do it together is because we're nurturing those partnerships day in, day out. It's something that takes work, but it takes work day after day. Something we need to keep working at, because our partnerships have never been more important than they are right now, given the state of play for law enforcement in this country. This is a uniquely difficult period in American law enforcement. I think it would be safe for me to say that for many of you, for many of us, this may be the most difficult stretch in your career. The threats that we face keep accumulating. They are complex, they're varied. I thought I'd go through a few of them, some of my initial observations about them, starting with the counterterrorism front. On the terrorism front, we still face enemies who are plotting elaborate mass casualty attacks of the sort that we saw on 9/11. These are intricate attacks that can take months or years to plan. But on top of that, changes in technology allow ISIS and others to recruit, radicalize, and direct people much more easily and remotely than ever before, all over the world, including right here in the U.S. We also face homegrown violent extremists and lone actors who self-radicalize right here in our backyards. And we worry, and we have good reason to worry, that terrorists are turning to crude but agile methods of attack, whether it's from vehicles to drones, attacks that can be planned much more leanly with fewer participants and can be adjusted or executed in a matter of days or even hours. So in short, we have a greater volume of, in many ways, more compact threats and much, much less time to detect and disrupt them. And that's why there's such a premium, and why it's so important that we continue to work together through partnerships like the JTTFs. And so I want to thank you for sharing your superstars with us on the JTTFs. I know that it's not easy for your departments to spare them, but it is incredibly valuable for us and for our communities. And I want to turn to violent crime for a moment, because although terrorism remains and needs to remain our #1 priority, I know that for many of you, violent crime is the biggest problem. Violent crime continues to rise in cities across the country now for the second year in a row. And you can know that we're going to be trying to do everything we can to help you. We're working with DOJ to help address violent crime as part of the revitalized Project Safe Neighborhoods. One of the things that I think we can do better this time around, Project Safe Neighborhoods, in my view, was very successful in the early 2000s, but one of the things that I think we can do more effectively this time is in the intelligence arena. The Bureau is much more mature and sophisticated in using intelligence to drive operations, not just in the national security arena, but across all fronts, including on the criminal side as well. And that's one of the places where I think we can be more effective. We want to share that intelligence with you. We have agents and analysts in the field working more closely with your intelligence commanders to identify, prioritize, and target some of the most dangerous criminals and their networks. We're looking at the factors that are driving violent crime and helping you develop and tailor strategies to address those drivers. We're providing crime trend analysis, including intelligence related to gun crime, and we're developing targeting packages in cities that are seeing surges in violent crime. All of this should allow you to focus your very limited resources where they're more needed and most effectively. And it will help all of us develop a more effective national strategy to fight violent crime. We're also looking to help in other ways through our commitment to the Safe Streets and Violent Crimes Task Forces, through our assistance with the review of crime scene CCTV footage, through the analysis of cell phone activity, tactical training, behavioral analysis, training in the use of ICAP, just to mention a few. And I look forward to working with all of you on that front. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the horrific events in Las Vegas, where I was just last week. We're all preparing and training for the next active shooter attack, just like we saw in Las Vegas. And as some of you know, we've trained thousands of law enforcement executives, officers, and first responders, both in person and through our film, The Coming Storm. And we now have a new documentary that takes a closer look at 3 specific active shooter events. And we're going to keep sharing best practices, all of us, because I think, unfortunately, we all know that it's not a question of if, but just when and where. On top of all that, as you all know, we face a growing opioid epidemic. And when I talk to SACs in the field, and to many of you, this is often one of the very first things mentioned. And so I understand how hard this is hitting everybody across the country. You're seeing record numbers of overdose deaths and life-threatening addictions, not just in bad parts of big cities or in low-income rural areas, but in communities around the country. And we need to educate the public about addiction. Arrests, expensive treatment options, and jail are only part of the answer. The stark reality is that we can't tackle this problem alone. It's grown way too big and way too sprawling. So we're working with public health, treatment professionals, and educators to increase public awareness. The FBI and the DEA together have offered a film that we produced together called Chasing the Dragon to educators at no cost. We've sent copies to every FBI and DEA field office across the country. We've held screenings for school groups and churches and community forums, and the film has nearly 1 million hits on the FBI's YouTube channel. We're also focused on transnational criminal organizations that traffic heroin and fentanyl. And much of the intelligence that we collect in these investigations comes from your officers and your deputies who know these communities inside and out. So thank you. Thank you for that. We're going to keep doing what we can, running down the leads and working with you and our OCDEF partners to try to prevent people from becoming addicted in the first place. But it's going to take, unfortunately, a Herculean team effort, but it's something we're all in together. Across all of these enforcement areas, and really most others, the going dark problem still presents another challenge for us. A challenge that grows larger and more complex with each passing day. As you know, we face a huge and increasing number of cases that rely on electronic evidence. But we also face a situation where we are increasingly unable to access that evidence despite lawful authority to do so. I mean, let me just give you some numbers to put some meat on the bones of a problem that I know you all are sensitive to. In the first 11 months of this fiscal year alone, we were unable to access the content of more than 6,900, that's 6,900 mobile devices using appropriate and available technical tools, even though we had the legal authority to do so. I just want to pause for a second to make sure that's actually sunk in. 6,900 mobile devices in 11 months. Each one of those 6,900 devices is tied to a specific subject, a specific defendant, a specific victim, a specific investigation. That's more than half, just to give you some context, that's more than half of all the mobile devices that we attempted to access in that time frame. And that's just at the FBI. That's not even counting those independently sought by you all or by our foreign counterparts. So to put it mildly, this is a huge, huge problem. It impacts investigations across the board: narcotics, human trafficking, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, gangs, organized crime, child exploitation. Now look, I get it. There's a balance that needs to be struck between the importance of encryption and the importance of giving us the tools we need to keep this country safe. But this is a pressing public safety issue for all of us. It's a gigantic problem, and it's an urgent problem, because as horrifying as 6,911 months sounds, it's going to be a lot worse than that in just a couple of years if we don't come up with some responsible solution. What that responsible solution is, I'm open to all ideas, because the solution is not clear-cut. It's going to require a thoughtful and measured approach, yes, but we need that thoughtful and measured approach to get to an answer fast. We have a whole team at headquarters, some of our very best people devoted trying to see if they can figure it out, but we're going to need to work together, both the government and the technology sector, to find a way forward, and to find a way forward quickly, because this cannot be allowed to continue. I cannot accept that there is anyone out there that thinks the state of play as it exists right now and the direction it's going is acceptable. It seems like no matter where we look, our communities are hurting. Hurricanes have pummeled the East Coast and the Gulf. Seemingly endless wildfires blanket the West Coast, and many of the people we serve are both scared and uncertain about what's happening around the country and around the world. I know that your departments are all struggling with many of the same problems: budget cuts, pension reductions, attrition, recruiting, and diversity issues, tense relations with some of the communities you serve. There is clearly room for improvement for every agency, every department, every officer, every deputy, and every agent. And there are changes we're going to need to find to better understand our communities and to make sure that the people we serve there know that we're there to help. Because the reality is we need their trust and we need their support. And we need their help. We need information, we need tips, we need leads, because we need to know what's really going on in their communities. We may need their testimony. And we can brag, and we have good reason to brag, about some of the advances in technology that help law enforcement and national security. Technological advances, electronic surveillance advances. We can talk about that all we want, but at the end of the day, I think everybody in this room knows that human beings, human sources make cases, and without them, we're all lost. So I'm not here to tell you for a moment that the FBI has all the answers to the many predicaments that we face, far from it. But we want to be able to help you in whatever way we can. We hope to be a national voice for the law enforcement community to address our collective challenges. We hope to be a bridge between law enforcement and some of the decision makers in Congress, at DOJ, some of the people who decide our budgets, and even a bridge between law enforcement and the citizens that we all serve together. So we're proud to work with the ICP. with major city chiefs, major county sheriffs, Noble, Aisha, and others to try to share best practices and try to figure out ways to help each other. We want to advocate for you and for your departments in whatever way we appropriately can. And most importantly, we want to make sure that our partnerships grow stronger every day. Law enforcement is not easy, to put it mildly. This life that you and your departments have chosen isn't easy. You see a lot of darkness, not just the literal darkness of late nights and long shifts, but the figurative darkness of some of the darker side of humanity. And you put your lives on the line every day. But you do it because you want to serve others, to keep people safe. And you do it because you recognize that you're part of something bigger than yourselves. You're certainly not in it for the big paycheck. So whether you see your career as a calling or a conscious choice that you made, I know that you are doing this day in, day out, and it's a heavy lift, especially when law enforcement is viewed negatively in a lot of communities. My guess is that the vast majority of you do this work because you find it incredibly rewarding to help other people. I know that because there are so many stories that flow into us, and I'm sure they're flowing into you, of amazing cops and deputies going way above and beyond the call of duty to help the citizens that they serve. Stories of people doing more than what is expected, more than what is asked, and often with very little recognition. The officer who pays for a hotel room out of her own pocket for the homeless woman and child sleeping outside on a cold winter night. The officer who drives a dad to Walmart to buy him a car seat for his kid rather than giving him a ticket. The officer who swings by the home of an elderly woman after his shift because she's not able to mow her own lawn. The cop who's shooting hoops with a kid at a local basketball court trying to help him understand shot after shot that he's there to help. The cop who convinces her squad to get everybody to pitch in to buy a bike for a kid who's walking miles after school each day to his after-school job because he's trying to save up for college. These are all real stories. And they're stories that reinforce that being a police officer isn't just what you do, it's who you are. And it's part of what makes me proud to be back working with you. You know, I've been on both sides a couple times now in my career, both in the private sector and in law enforcement. And my wife often comments to me how much happier I seem when I'm in law enforcement. And I'm sure we've all had our own kind of aha moments. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before. But for me, one of them was when my daughter was about 5 years old. And she was in nursery school. And it was Dad's Day at school. And the teachers had asked all the kids the same set of questions, and then the teachers had written the answers down on these little construction paper teddy bears, and then they posted all the teddy bears all over the bulletin board. So all the dads, show up. Some of the questions they'd asked the kids, probably in hindsight, might have been a little dicey, like what do mom and dad like to do when they're home alone? Got some very interesting answers from 5-year-olds on those questions. But some of them maybe were a little safer. And one of them was, what does your dad do at work? So I'm standing there kind of deep in thought, staring at this bulletin board of teddy bears. And I become aware of this guy standing right next to me. And he's looking over at me. So finally I start looking over at him. I'm like, dude, you're in my space a little bit. And so finally he said, do you mind if I ask what you do for a living? This was when I was a line prosecutor. So I looked at him for a minute. I looked back at the teddy bears, and my daughter's teddy bears, to the question, what does your dad do at work, said, my daddy and his friends put bad guys in jail and help keep us all safe. And then I looked over at his teddy bear, and it said, my daddy talks on the phone all day so mommy and I can buy nice stuff. I'm just saying, we may not be able to compete on paycheck, but we can compete on mission. I mean, if you want to talk about doing something that a 5-year-old can appreciate as really meaningful, it's pretty neat to be able to do what we do. And so I just want to say that there's no amount of money that can make up for that kind of career fulfillment. There's no amount of money that can make up for being able to do things for other people in your community and in your country. So I want to thank you for everything you do to help us partner with you, and for your friendship and for your support. And I look forward to getting to know all of you and working with you. And I think, Don, I have time for a few questions maybe, or yeah. So thank you very much. All right, so somebody's got to have a question. Really? This is IACP, right? Yeah, no, right.
Good afternoon, Director. Thank you for your comments today. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on the future of fusion centers and their uses as we move into the next 2 to 3 years.
So I think fusion centers is another example of a place where I think there's been a lot of momentum build up. When I left government, I guess 2005, fusion centers obviously existed, but there was still kind of a feeling of being on the upswing. I know now, as an example of how far we've come, and I think we have fusion centers co-located in FBI space, I think in 27 different locations across the country. A good example is in Atlanta, where we just opened a brand new field office, and we took great pains, the SAC there, to help make sure that we built in space into the brand new building for a fusion center there. In many ways, the fusion center, if you think about it, blends two of the things that I think I've seen the most strides on in the Bureau in kind of this before and after experience that I've had. One is on the partnerships, which I talked about a minute ago, but the other is on the intelligence side. You know, when the Bureau has always been an intelligence agency as well as a law enforcement agency. But if you compare where we are right now on the intelligence front with where we were then, it's like night and day. So to me, when I think fusion centers, I think partnership and I think intelligence, and I think them kind of meshing together. So I think you can expect to see a lot more commitment to those going forward, a lot more sophisticated ideas about how we can use them more effectively. To me, what's exciting about the next 10 years is, having made the strides over the last 10 years, now we're kind of at version 2.0, and how can we become even more advanced in how we try to take sort of our 2 at the FBI with your 2 and somehow make it more than 4. You know, how do we find those synergies? Because that ultimately is what makes partnerships successful. The whole point is to be in a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so that, to me, is finding what we can uniquely bring to the table together with what you can uniquely bring to the table, for example, by better knowing your own communities and putting sort of some of our disciplines together with your better on-the-ground knowledge, just as one example, and seeing how we can kind of make those mesh together. Because the reality is we're all being asked to do more with less. That's a term that, as some of you heard me say, I despise, because that's usually what the people who control the budgets tell us. We want you to do more with less. It's like, yeah, thanks. Now you're making us do less with less. So I think the only way we're going to be able to deal with this accumulation of challenges in that environment and not have more with less, become less with less, is to find those synergies. And fusion centers, I think, are a great example of where we can work together. Yes? Another great example. I was struck by, when I arrived, how fast I was in contact with, especially in the Five Eyes, but not uniquely. My conversations were happening with some of my counterparts. As a classic example of that, you know, Andrew Parker, the head of MI5, flew over on September 11th itself, no less, and spent the day with me for no reason other than just to come over and talk. Now, we had talked on the phone before, but that meant a lot to me. My first overseas trip is coming up. I also noticed that's at kind of the level that I am with my counterparts, but even as you go down, we now have people co-located, embedded in lots of other countries at this point on everything from counterterrorism to gang activity, transnational criminal organizations, cyber, you name it. And likewise, a lot of our foreign partners have folks over here embedded in a way that wasn't true. And I think we can expect to see more and more of that, because the reality is there are very few matters now where there isn't some cross-border dimension. Either the evidence is in one place, but the defendant's in another, or they're co-conspirators who are sprinkled across multiple countries, or even in the increasingly rare instance where whatever the matter is just in one country. The reality is we're all seeing very similar things, so there's the need to share observations and practices. Another thing I've noticed on the overseas cooperation front is in our LEGAT program. When I left government, I would say it was not unusual to see LEGATs who had had a very distinguished career, but maybe were looking for a break. Now, the LEGATs that I encounter, and I think I've had visits from maybe 8 or 9 of my foreign counterparts, and that's not counting all the phone calls. And of course, in each one of them, interacting with our LEGAT. The LEGATs that I see now are experienced, hard-charging, dedicated, passionate people. I saw one the other day, a fellow who's an alum of the New York office who'd been a LEGAT in a couple different places. And the guy was like he was shot out of a cannon. He was so energetic and passionate about building partnerships, building relationships with the different countries that he'd been in. And this was a guy who was a very experienced, very skilled agent who'd made major cases. But he's not alone. That same kind of zeal and quality of the kinds of people who are the LEGATs that we're having now, I think is a measure of just how important that is to us. And I think you can expect to see that just growing over the next 10 years. Yes? So, I think partnership, I've talked about partnership with state and local and foreign. Obviously, partnership with our federal partners is crucial. The film that I mentioned that we produced together and the dissemination of that is a good example. I know that the Deputy Attorney General, for example, recently went over to China, and part of his point of being over there was to put down pretty firm marker about some of the flow that's coming in. And I know from my conversations with the Attorney General that that's very much top of mind. It's a big priority for him. I think we're still trying to evaluate the best way to be effective, but I think there's an expectation that we're going to be more proactive and more aggressive in that arena. Because if we just wait until it comes here, I think we've already kind of lost half the battle. So I think that's, again, a place where a partnership is going to be important, not just FBI and DEA, but FBI, DEA with foreign counterparts, state and local law enforcement, and frankly, a lot of other agencies as well. Others? Don't be shy.
I'm from Canada, and I worked 5 years in anti-terrorism. One of our irritants at the time was information sharing between our federal, provincial, and municipal police forces. Do you find that there's still a lot of work to do, or we've come full circle and now the information sharing, whether it's in our country or your country, is efficient?
Yes and yes. I think I've found that the question was about information sharing and whether we'd come full circle or whether there was still work to be done. I think the answer is we've come a very, very long way. I felt like information sharing irritants, as you say, complaints, were during that 2001 to 2005 era when I was so involved with this stuff before, was a many times a day complaint. It's not that people weren't working hard on it, they were, Everybody recognized post 9/11 that the cardinal sin is not getting information to somebody who needs to have it. So people were well-intentioned and well-motivated and working hard on the problem. But it's easier to say it than it is to do it, in the context of a specific investigation. I'm not seeing nearly those kinds of problems now, but that doesn't mean we don't have room for improvement. It still comes up. There's still times where there's a left-hand, right-hand kind of thing. But I do think the progress that's been made illustrates the importance of not having the wall, so to speak, between law enforcement and intelligence that was such a feature of the pre-9/11 era. Taking down that wall, improving the connectivity and the information sharing between intelligence and law enforcement, between federal and state and local and foreign, between, frankly, to some extent, between the public and the private sectors, kind of getting that down, understanding what needs to be shared with whom and when and how is not easy to do, and I think it's taken a long time for people to get to where we are now. I do worry that we're moving into an era where people may get complacent about the lack of another attack, and at least in the U.S., it's something that I'm hearing more and more about. I don't know how many of you have been following the debate on something we call Section 702, which is, on the one hand, you'd think, well, that's just a federal tool. Just so you know, Section 702 is part of FISA, and it's a critical tool that allows the U.S. intelligence community to target foreign individuals located overseas for foreign intelligence reasons. And while that's done by the NSA, we at the FBI get access to some of that information. It's actually a relatively small part of that information in the grand scheme of things, but what we get is incredibly valuable because it allows us, for example, to see in the context of an ISIS recruiter who they're communicating with, so that when, just as an example, let's say one of you, somebody in your department, sees somebody in the middle of the night taking pictures of a bridge from all kinds of strange angles, or taking pictures outside a military base or a school or a nuclear power plant. The person taking those pictures isn't committing a crime, but I think we can all agree it's odd, and we want the person who spots it to raise his hand and say, that seems odd. Well, we get tips like that all the time, all day long, all year long. We get that piece of information, maybe it's a license plate number or something else. That's taking that nugget and trying to figure out, is this just some whack job who happens to want to take pictures of something strange, or is this somebody who's up to really no good? The one way we're going to figure that out is to be able to take that piece of information and run it in our database of information that we've already lawfully collected and see, does that connect? If that person who was in that car taking that picture happens to be somebody who's communicating overseas with a known ISIS recruiter, I think we can all agree, whoop, that one needs to go up the priority scale. The reason we're able to do that, the reason we're able to connect those dots is because of Section 702. And I bring it up now because if you haven't already heard about it in the press, you will be hearing about it because it expires at the end of this calendar year. And if it doesn't get renewed and reauthorized in essentially the form it already is, we're about to get another blind spot. I talked about going dark. This is another one if it doesn't get reauthorized. And some of the conversations that are going on right now between some of the interest groups and some members of Congress, it sounds eerily similar to what we heard before 9/11. And people say, my God, the public says, my gosh, how could the government collectively allow 9/11? Now, 3,000 people died. And then one of the answers is, well, there was this wall between law enforcement and intelligence. And so right-thinking people say, well, how could there be this wall? Because it wasn't because of the Constitution. That wall wasn't required by the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, or anything else. It was well-intentioned people thinking that it was a precaution that ought to be taken. That wall existed, again, because of good intentions, but misguided ones. Well, now, fast forward 2017 in the fall, there are people talking about things that would start laying new bricks, building a new wall. That's what that is. So as you read that in the press, you start hearing about it and wondering, why does that matter? That's why it matters. It's the connecting of the dots. It's the things that everybody in the law enforcement and national security communities, federal, state, local, foreign, have worked so hard on over that last 10 to 15 years to kind of build those partnerships I talked about, to build the connectivity I talked about. Now people are talking about, and again, they mean well, they're well-intentioned, it's in good faith, but it's efforts to rebuild another wall. And so I'm very much hoping that we can reason with them and persuade them not to go that route. But stay tuned, because as if we didn't have enough challenges, all of us collectively, we could have another one coming.
I was just going to say, the director has a very busy schedule, so one final question for him.
Yes, sir.
In your conversations with many of your SACs and employees across the bureau, have they come to you with any one particular or few particular things that's resonated about things they'd like to change or see change in the bureau, or something that you've come across already in 11 weeks? Like, why did they do it this way? How can we fix this?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we all worry about, and actually we've talked quite a bit about, we had, as some of you may know, and I know I can see quite a number of our SACs in this room. We had our SACs conference earlier this week here in Philadelphia, is diversity. The reality is we're very focused on trying to make sure that our workforce better reflects America and the communities we serve, and it doesn't as much as it should, not nearly. And there's a lot of attention being paid to it. We're starting to see some progress, but I'm impatient with the level of progress we've achieved. So it's something that we're talking about and trying to figure out how we might be able to do better. I had a good conversation with folks at Noble the other day, and I'm looking forward to trying to see if they've already had some good ideas that they've relayed to me. So I hope to continue that conversation, because we're just not where we need to be on that front. And I talked earlier about earning the trust and support of our communities. You know, part of that is having people have faith that we represent all of America and not just part of it. So that's something that I think we're talking about. I think none of us is satisfied with where we are, but it's one of these problems. It's a lot easier for us to say we want to fix than it is to actually fix it. But it's not for lack of trying, and we're going to try harder. Thank you all. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate all you
Thanks,
do in
Tom.
the minute when you do.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the conference.
No, absolutely, it's great.
Thanks for taking time for some questions.